So as we all know, there are three main tenets that make up the Fast and Furious franchise: family, cars, and Corona. But there is another one, which is their reputation for being quite stupid, physics-deprived blockbusters where the main characters are essentially superheroes. But those main three elements have been there since the start of the franchise, and the fourth component would be added in somewhere along the way, so we're going to look at the first 7 Fast and Furious movies to see how they went from simple movies about street racing to the modern day selection, in the process adding in that fourth tenet and transforming into action spectacles. Okay, so we're going to start off at the very beginning with the original The Fast and the Furious, which is a ways away from the modern selection. It's a very small-scale movie about a cop, Brian O'Connor, being sent undercover to infiltrate Dominic Toretto's street racing crew and investigate a series of high-speed truck robberies. Along the way, Brian falls in love with Dom's sister, Mia, finds a home in the street racing scene, and ultimately places his loyalty in that life. Now, overall, as a guy who couldn't care more about cars, it's pretty bad. It's too slow-paced for the stylish action film it goes for, and it has way too much early 2000s injected into it. For being a motorsport movie, I find the racing quite boring because it's just cars driving in a straight line, and it just feels like a question of who has the faster car, rather than who is the better driver, which it should be. Nothing feels earned, especially with the Fast and Furious' treatment of the going native trope. With other movies like Avatar, Pocahontas, or Dances with Wolves, you get a sense as to why Jake Sully, John Smith, or John Dunbar ultimately decide to change their ways. But in the Fast and the Furious, you get a sliver of romance, a bit of chemistry between Dom and Brian, and that's it. Ultimately, Dom is kind of a bad person. He's robbing trucks of DVD players, and Brian's just cool with it, and he lets him go. There's no real scene of him noticeably falling in love. It hardly even says he is. He just is for the sake of the plot. Vin Diesel is great as Dom, and overall, I think my dislike of the movie is a me thing. I just don't have real passion for any of the characters or ideas, and it feels rushed despite its slow pace. Outside of having one of the best sequel titles ever, Too Fast, Too Furious is just another solid movie, and basically retreads the plot of the original, but with a bit less to talk about. It's a very simple film that provides simple enjoyment. Brian O'Connor, now an ex-cop, is brought back into the business when asked to infiltrate a dangerous criminal ring and take down the boss. And when I say boss, I mean I have absolutely no idea who he is, and the only thing memorable about him is his methods of torture. So Brian is hired to bring him down with his old friend Roman, who is basically the Vin Diesel stand-in. I think it's slightly better than the original because it takes itself way less seriously, especially with Roman, who is one of the best characters in these movies and constantly drops lines like, It also has less of a focus on the street racing, and what little there is improved. There's some better action scenes, especially in the climax, where you can see the newer Fast and Furious movies peak their Isaac Newton hating head out with a car jumping onto a boat. Although, it's nothing compared to the later movies. So yeah, simple forgettable villain, simple forgettable premise, simple forgettable movie. There's no real fault with it, it's just kinda boring, and I'd best describe it as an airplane movie. So far, the Fast and Furious movies have gotten slightly better the further we've gone on, and the third installment in the series, Tokyo Drift, continues the trend. There were also some big changes with this one, but we have not gotten to the shark jumping moment yet. Justin Lin would come on to direct, and with a few hiccups become the David Yates or Christopher McQuarrie of the Fast franchise. Lin would also use more practical effects, which adds a lot to the racing and action sequences. The movie is also completely separated from either of the other movies up to this point, outside of a small Dom cameo. Tokyo Drift follows an American high schooler named Sean, who's great at racing and terrible at staying out of trouble. After moving to Tokyo to be with his father, He falls into the street racing scene there and is taken in by a mysterious mentor named Han. The movie's a bit boring in the first half, but the racing is a huge step up, because it's no longer a drag race, there's turns and there's drifting, which is good, because the movie has a far greater focus on the street races, with John's whole motive in this movie to learn the titular Tokyo Drift and rise to the top of the street racing scene. And eventually Han is killed as Sean gets in trouble with the Yakuza, and through that, Sean becomes the Drift King. I think that the biggest thing that brings it down is the pacing. The film feels somewhat directionless at times. And overall, it's a good ride, and again, simple, forgettable premise, simple, forgettable characters, but the box office numbers were down this time, as was critical reception. The Fast and Furious franchise needed to change. They needed to shed the street racing roots and become something completely different. So now that we're at the middle of these movies, where street racing meets action spectacles, I'd really like to talk about the naming schemes of these movies, because it doesn't really exist. We start off with The Fast and the Furious, which is fine. The next one is called Too Fast, Too Furious, which I really can't disrespect, although it's a bit weird. It is one of the greatest sequel titles of all time. Then they just throw in a random subtitle with The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. And then for the fourth movie, it's just Fast and Furious. No 4 or anything. Then for 5, they drop the and Furious and just call it Fast 5 for alliteration. Then Fast and Furious 6 is the only one with a name that I think should be standard for the series. And then Furious 7 just drops that and the Fast and of the naming scheme. Then 8 just drops the whole franchise name, instead going for the fate of the Furious, which makes no sense. Then 9 creates the abbreviation F for the franchise, which hasn't been used before, and pairing it with a 9 and an explicable subtitle, The Fast Saga, which doesn't make any sense because that's the name of the franchise and not the movie. And for 10, it's called Fast X, so you might be saying that's the same as 5. But no, this is the first time in the series that 10 entries in, they use Roman numerals. Like, why not call the 11th one Toretto's 11 and the 12th one 12 Furious Men? Because that makes just as much sense as any of the titles in the series. The Fast and Furious franchise's response to the poor performance of Tokyo Drift was Fast and Furious 4, simply titled Fast and Furious, functioning as a sort of reboot for the franchise and putting it into summer blockbuster territory, which was at least the intent for this movie. But of the 3 sequels we've had so far, this is by far the most direct sequel to the original, spending a lot of time on Brian's relationship with Dom and showing them start to regain friendship after the events of 1. Speaking of Brian, he's now an FBI agent. Not sure how he got there. Seemed like the last time we saw him he was a ex-cop, but whatever, I'll let it slide. And he has to work on capturing big bad cartel drug guy, Braga. And Dom gets tied into the story after Letty was put undercover and killed at the hands of Braga. So it's mixing revenge thriller, serious crime movie, and car action. And as much as I like each and every one of those genres, I just don't think they mix very well. Like, the tones and pacing of those genres don't match up well, and it feels so disjointed. It's too slow for a car movie, too unbelievable for a crime movie. And the revenge plot involves Dom knowing exactly how Letty was killed from some skid marks on the road. Again, all the elements are good. They just form a very disjointed story that I can't really recommend. Bringing the franchise to summer blockbuster status actually more or less saved the franchise, as Fast and Furious would be the highest grossing movie in the franchise up to that point. Fast 5 is the perfect mix of insane, fun, action, cars, and it's still somewhat believable. We finally found it. This is a perfect Fast and Furious movie. They bring back everybody from the old movies: Han, Roman, Tej, Giselle, Vince, Mia, and of course, Dom and Paul. The plot is also great, which is the team pulling off the ultimate heist of 100 million from a drug lord in Brazil. The team is also fugitives, running from Hobbs, who is, in my opinion, the best character in all of these movies, and really Dwayne Johnson's best role. He's just able to drop lines like,
"Give me the damn veggies."
and it's so goofy, yet The Rock manages to pull it off. There's not even any street races in Fast 5, which is crazy how far the series has gone from B-movies about cars to blockbuster action. This movie is really just Ocean's 11 with cars and an assassination attempt on intelligence and subtlety. And that is shown the best in the way they steal the safe with the money. They hook up the safe to 2 cars and just drive them through the streets of Brazil, causing hundreds of thousands of property damage, all whilst a massive car chase breaks out with the corrupt police and Hobbs. It's now on their side, and it's just so amazing. I feel like the only other action sequence I've seen that's better than this is the helicopter chase in Mission Impossible Fallout. And the rest of the action scenes are great. There's a train robbery, a foot chase through the favelas reminiscent of The Bourne Ultimatum, an ambush reminiscent of Clearing Present Danger, and Dom and Hobbs have a fist fight, all of which is amazing. But this is the turning point where these movies would start to become modern, physics-deprived, clean blockbusters. Like 4 and 5 were blockbusters, but still mostly believable and grimy. From here on out, the franchise starts to look very polished and clean. Fast and Furious 6 had some big shoes to fill, especially after the success of 5. Lives up to those expectations pretty nicely. I mean, it's not as good as 5, but it's completely enjoyable. They got a new villain to face, Shaw and his team, which is essentially the bizarro version of Dom's, a coordinated, always ahead, unstoppable force, best compared to the Joker, explained in car terms. Instead of having Hobbs as a lesser villain like in 5, he is now the co-lead with Dom and Brian, as he's recruited Dom's team because Letty's back. You know, the Letty that died 2 movies ago. This time, it's not a prequel. It's just a case of amnesia brought on from being shot by a pistol in the head at point-blank range. So yeah, this is where these movies start to lose the logic. Now, outside of the kind of weird plot, this movie is a ton of fun. Shaw is great, but the rest of the team is kind of lacking on the bizarro premise. I'd like to see them go at it in cars in one crazy car chase, but that never happens. There's always some advantage they have, whether it be the ramp cars, a tank, or a massive plane. But still, those sequences are stupidly fun, so I'm not going to complain. And that's sort of the vibe that you get from these movies. Dumb, fun, and stupid. There's also a random element of interconnectedness with Fast 6, like they were trying to create the Fast and Furious cinematic universe. Random events from the 4th movie are now important, like Letty or Braga showing back up. And with that MCU influence comes another Marvel influence. Dom is basically a superhero at this point. He shrugs off a bullet to the shoulder, manages to do a superhuman leap from a speeding car, catch Letty, and just because there was a car there to break his landing, he's fine. He's also got superhuman strengths and car skills. So we've finally made it, the final form of the Fast and Furious franchise. Please say that 5 times fast. And it's pure bliss. But what is the final form, you may ask? Well, it's similar to the modern Mission Impossible films, but so much dumber and a little bit more fun. After taking down Shaw in 6, Dom's team are brought back into business. After Owen Shaw's brother, Deckard, wants revenge. He kills Han, which finally comes around to the events of Tokyo Drift, and begins hunting the rest of the team. At the same time, Dom's team fights with a terrorist named Jakarde for control of the MacGuffin, the God's Eye. The movie is amazing fun despite its stupidness. This is a movie where Dom and the team drop cars out of a plane and parachutes the next action sequence. This is a movie where Dom drives a car out of a skyscraper, lands in another skyscraper, drives through that one, and lands in another skyscraper. This is a movie where Dwayne Johnson flexes off his cast to appear in the climax while down in a helicopter with a massive minigun. And it's not like it's some high form of cinema. In the end, it still has that amazing heart that made the first movie critically successful. Paul Walker tragically died in the production of this film, and despite it being a movie that had all of that, it's still treated with all the respect it deserves. And by the end, that's what made these movies work. Dom could be shrugging off bullets or going into space, but as long as it's taken with enough seriousness, these movies work. So we're not done just yet, so we're gonna take a look at some scenes from the start of the franchise and the end to compare. So we're gonna look at some fist fights to start off. From the first movie, the fighting looks raw, real, and dirty. It seems like Brian and Vince are fighting without training in any martial arts or even boxing for that matter, and it feels genuinely real outside of the 2000s color grading. Moving on to 7's Hobbs vs. Shaw, you can see it's basically the opposite. It looks choreographed to a T. The characters are fighting like highly trained operatives, and the biggest difference, nobody shrugs off a bomb at the end of Brian vs. Vince. Also, Dwayne Johnson, who plays Hobbs, and Jason Statham, who plays Shaw, have it in their contracts that the fights have to be evenly matched, and they can't lose fights for fear of their egos. So that's fist fights. Now let's take a look at the climactic car chases of both 1 and 7. Rewatching the ending chase of 1, it's genuinely suspenseful, desperate as the team tries to save Vince. You get the idea that the team is genuinely out of their craft and trying everything that they can do. Moving on to 7's, well, the scene starts with the cars going skydiving, and when in the chase, the cars just shrug off bullets, and the team with little effort are able to take down a military convoy. And not to mention, the scene ends with Brian saving himself by jumping off a bus onto the spoiler of a car that Letty drove near the cliff because he just knew it would save him. That's the problem with the new movies. There's no stakes. We know the characters are going to be okay and nothing really changes in the status quo of the franchise.